Hello and welcome to Heartbeat. This week we'll bring you my interview with Jonathon Van Maren at the SPUC National Conference. William will bring us a roundup of news from home and abroad, and Catherine gives us her view on Napro Technology. Jonathon Van Maren is a Canadian pro-life activist and columnist. He is a communications director for the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, whose vision is nothing less than an abortion-free Canada. Jonathon is the author of titles such as Seeing is Believing, Why Our Culture Must Face the Victims of Abortion, and Patriots, the Untold Story of Ireland's pro-life movement. When Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, Jonathon acknowledged it as the biggest blow the sexual revolution had ever received. Jonathon, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Can I ask, first of all, what inspired you to get involved with this work and effectively to dedicate your life to the pro-life cause?
It was an encounter with abortion that was quite unexpected. It was my first year of university. I was going for my degree in history, and my long-term plan at the time was academia. And one of my professors mentioned abortion in the classroom, just sort of casually, as if it was an objectively good thing, and there was no debate about that. And I grew up in a pro-life Christian home, and I knew that wasn't true, but I didn't really know how to argue about it. So I went up to the library and I Googled abortion to find some arguments, and ended up watching an abortion video from start to finish. And seeing that baby be violently destroyed changed the course of my life in a literal sort of before or after way. I joined the pro-life club on campus. I ended up getting involved in doing a pro-life outreach with the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform when Stephanie Gray was still the executive director, and realizing that when you talk to people and showed them what abortion was, so often you could see them change their mind, cancel their abortions, kind of made me realize there's something I can do about this. And there it went.
So having become activated, if you like, what have you found to be the most effective arguments or the most effective strategies when you're talking to people, let's say those who are in the kind of general mass in the middle, the sort of undecideds, the people who don't give a huge amount of thought and maybe deliberately keep it out of their minds?
So we use a two-pronged approach at CCBR, and it's based on intensive research. We've hired pollsters to test our projects to ensure that they're effective. We're constantly honing our conversational apologetics on the street. And so for arguments, we find the most effective argument to be the human rights argument, which is an argument that still appeals to the vast majority of mushy middle people, even if they have sort of no defined moral code that they could refer to. And it's very simple. Human beings have human rights. Human rights begin when the human being begins. Science tells us when a human life begins, and therefore abortion is a human rights violation. And there's so many intuitive things that a pro-choicer will say that can be used against them as well when they say, oh, we don't know when life begins. And then we say, well, when do you think life begins? Oh, maybe 12 weeks. Well, 12 weeks from what? You've told us actually when life begins, just by the language that you use in discussing this. And so that's one of the primary arguments that we use. Strategically speaking, it is abortion victim photography, which is not an idea that we came up with. The use of victim imagery to shift a culture on an issue of injustice, to essentially present the best evidence for our case in the public square, was first invented by William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787. And then subsequently used by the Congo Reform Movement here in the UK, used by the American Civil Rights Movement under Martin Luther King Jr., the National Child Labor Committee under Lewis Hine. And so what we've done is we've adopted and adapted these historically proven tactics of social reform for the 21st century abortion context. And we've seen tremendous success with that.
Because there has often been a reluctance, maybe even a squeamishness, often on the part of pro-life activists about using such stark imagery. But your experience is that it can be very effective.
The imagery is incredibly powerful because it's essentially answering the question, right to choose what. And it's also, we live in a visual culture, and so visuals are even more important than they were 25 years ago. People don't think in ethics, and people don't think in apologetics, and they don't think certainly in philosophy or theology. They think in stories. And so we need to introduce them to the victims of abortion. We need to show them that abortion is not about a what, but about a who. And so our polling shows 67% of people who just see an image of an aborted baby feel more negatively about abortion just because of what they saw.
Now, we know on one sense the impact of abortion in the demographic sense. Western societies are now millions of people short from what they should have had.
Yeah.
What about the other cultural effects, the downstream from the actual abortion? What do you think are the biggest and the most dangerous cultural effects of societies that allow abortion?
This is a very hard question to answer because I don't think we fully know yet what the downstream effects of abortion are, right? Mother Teresa famously said in her Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech that if a mother can kill her child in the womb, what is left but for me and you to kill each other? And I thought of that when I saw the news of the assassination of Charlie Kirkbrake, that so many of the acts of violence we're seeing now are people seeing other people as inconvenient, which is the fundamental premise of the abortion worldview. As somebody who's done to countless hours of pro-life outreach, I've heard so many times from people that they'll admit it's a human being, they'll admit that it's even a person, but as long as this baby is entirely dependent on me, it's inconvenient and I can kill him or her. And so you can't have war in the womb and peace in the streets, ultimately, I don't think.
Now, can we learn from international examples in other countries? We often think of these issues as very culturally specific. The debate on the right to life in the USA has its own tone, has its own language, has its own style, similarly in Canada, similarly here. But is there an underpinning that we can all share, that we can all use, but then put our own sort of cultural veneer across the top of it?
I do think that human rights apologetics and abortion victim photography are culturally accessible across lines. But you're 100% correct, of course, that it's very interesting to me often because the American pro-life movement, being one of the world's largest, kind of has an outsized presence in the pro-life space. But then when I spent some time in Ireland prior to the 2018 abortion referendum, it's a completely different cultural context. Their abortion debate is completely different. It's shaped by their own history and their own brilliant and beautiful movement and what they've done. The UK and Canada are, I think, far more similar because our heritage is, of course, similar. Our rates of secularization are very similar. That would be true, I think, for New Zealand and to a degree Australia as well. But I do think that everybody can still understand a picture.
Now, you've written a lot about how the media frames abortion and the influence that the media has on that. What do you think are the biggest lies that the media spread about abortion?
Oh, man, the biggest lies. I think the biggest lie would be that they insist on referring to the abortion debate as if it's pro-lifers arguing with abortion activists. But the main character in this great moral drama, the one who we're all arguing about, the unborn baby, is basically absented. They're an absent character in their own story. And the second worst thing, which would be by far the most effective tactic, is this lie that they pound home relentlessly, which is that you can have a culture that cares for women, or you can have a pro-life regime, one or the other. Savita Halappanavar, the case in Malta, nonstop now in the United States, they are making the fundamental blood libel that women will die if abortion is illegal, which is not the case, but that is by far their most effective propaganda point.
The irony there is that in 1967, when the UK abortion legislation was being passed, it was designed, quote, to stop the backstreet abortions.
Yeah.
We're now in a situation where the majority of our abortions are by pills by post, where they're being taken at home in back streets with bloody and brutal consequences.
Yep.
And effectively, we've come full circle now to having legally permissible backstreet abortions.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like they were lying the first time.
Exactly, and we've got to the truth.
Yeah.
So coming back to the media then, what changes or what lessons do pro-life advocates have to learn to make better use of the media? Can we make better use of the media? Are there mistakes we're making? Should we change our tactics?
So I think that there's two things I would emphasize in relation to the media. The first one is that our projects have to be what we call a force multiplier. If you can force the media to cover your projects, then you win, whether it's getting pictures, imagery of preborn children into the media or abortion victim photography. The second is that when we do an interview with the press, we see it as an opportunity to emphasize the violence of abortion and the humanity of the preborn. And so whatever I'm there to talk about, those are the 2 points that I'm going to make relentlessly. The third one is I do think that we badly need more young pro-lifers who are willing to kind of consider media, because there are these figures that write, there's been some op-eds in the Times of London that were quite good. In the United States, Ross Douthat, a pro-life devout Catholic, writes for the New York Times and openly makes the case against abortion in the New York Times. It's a very tough job to do, but we definitely need voices in those spaces as well.
And is there an issue? Sometimes, again, a lot of young men in this sphere can be a bit reluctant to come forward because they've been influenced by this assertion that this is a debate for women and only women can take part in the debate, and a man doesn't really have the right to pronounce on it, far less to sort of proselytize about it. Is that a problem? Is it something that we should just ignore, or is it something we should account for, be sensitive to, try and maximize the number of young women who we, for example, train and prepare for this sort of apologetics?
The pro-life movement badly needs more men, and they badly need more young men. That's a problem almost everywhere that I've been, actually. No matter where, which country I'm in, it's interesting because the accusation always is the pro-life movement is old white men, right? I'm like, well, we could use some more men, to be completely honest, but most of the pro-life organizations are almost 60-40 female to male. And you need to have a good balance, I find. I always think that an organization balanced brings the genius of both sexes into play when we're fighting this issue that involves both men and women so intimately and so profoundly. And so one, I think men need to recognize that there's nothing more masculine about defending those who can't defend themselves. Nothing more masculine. And then second of all, I think that one of the tragedies of the pro-life movement now is that a lot of young men, because they're struggling with pornography and other issues, feel themselves ill-equipped or are too ashamed to join the pro-life movement because of the way they've been ensnared by things like that. This is another issue I think that needs to be addressed.
Well, we've found that sometimes when we've done vox pops and asked people for their attitudes to decriminalisation, let's say, which happened here not all that long ago, almost to a man, literally, when we ask men, what do you think about this? They pull back and say, it's not for me to say. This is for women. If women want to do it, let them go ahead. It's unusual in that sense. It's hard to think of any other issues which polarize so clearly on sort of gender lines, but it does happen a lot here with young men not wanting to even voice an opinion on that.
Yeah, and that's a combination of being cowed by the establishment that's told them they have nothing to say, but I also think it's a moral surrender, and it is convenient to some degree as well, because if abortion is her choice, then the baby is her problem. And so it is true that for a lot of young men, we find this on university campuses, to say that I have nothing to say about abortion is actually a pretty convenient worldview to hold if you're the sort of person on campus who doesn't mind engaging in promiscuous activity.
Mm-hmm. Of course, irony there is, as you've alluded to, we do have legislation in this country that says a father, even though he's unmarried and has no legal connection to the mother, is legally obliged to support the child. And can be pursued in the courts to make sure that he does. So he is connected to the child and the life of that child. Are there any areas in the UK, pro-life activism, that give you hope, or in North America for that matter? Are there any developments, any initiatives that you think these are giving me hope for the future of the cause?
Oh, I can give you two very obvious ones. The first is coming here from Canada, where our euthanasia debate involved the state broadcaster having somebody who supported legalization and somebody who didn't think legalization went far enough, and the other side was entirely cut out of it. I have viewed the debate happening here in the UK over the past 2 years with a lot of envy. Even the progressive press, even The Guardian covers the issues. There's a robust debate on assisted suicide, on the implications. The Times came out and did an editorial advising the House of Lords to reject the euthanasia bill. In Canada, there was one columnist at the National Post who said almost anything, and for the rest of it, it was almost a total blackout. And so looking at the vibrancy of the debate here has been very encouraging. And even I talked to Lord David Frost a little while back, him openly saying, we just need to emphasize the fact that our Judeo-Christian heritage is necessary for the protection of the vulnerable. And that's what I'm going to do. And he said to me, increasingly people are just embracing, saying, this is where my values come from, and these values are badly needed in the culture right now. And so that's a really big one. The second sign of hope is, I was genuinely stunned when the decriminalization of abortion happened to see the outpouring of outrage across party lines online. I counted probably half a dozen members of the House of Lords who called it either infanticide or killing a baby. I saw a number of them call it murder, which is extraordinary language for people to use with regard to abortion in any way. It was almost kind of like they were so horrified that the scales fell from their eyes for a moment and they could say what they actually thought without considering the implications for what abortion is all the way up until fertilization. And even Kathleen Stock, like a pro-choice Oxford feminist, called it killing a baby in a column that she wrote. And so it was encouraging to me because we can sink into this sort of despair that everybody's consciences are so hardened that there's no way we're ever going to be able to change people's minds. And then something happens and you see a flicker and you realize, okay, no, people still have the capacity to be horrified, and it's our job to ensure that they don't stop being horrified.
It's interesting you talk about the debate here on assisted suicide, but sadly, if not ironically, the experience in Canada has actually been very, very helpful. It's been very useful because, it's so horrific, so many examples of how MAID has worked and how far and how fast it has pushed. And, we talk about the slippery slope and we see, it seems as if it's free fall now in the Canadian case, the extent to which that's available and becoming so widely acceptable. So the horrendous example of Canada has actually been something we've been able to use to pull people up and say, do you want to go there? It's terrifying.
We have the dubious distinction of being an international cautionary tale that's so bad that Kim Ledbetter actually was offended when somebody compared her bill to Canada. Like, that's who we are now, which is a pretty... it's pretty tragic. But the debate was so... suppressed in Canada that pro-life voices, those who were against assisted suicide, were virtually not allowed to say anything. They were cut out of the press entirely. And at least in the UK, you still have a very vibrant and combative press environment, which, as somebody who comes from a place that doesn't have any of that, I'm very envious of, actually.
If you were to give a few words of advice to some young people who were watching this and interested in trying to have their voices heard, but seeing so many avenues open to them, do they just pursue perhaps some work in an academic sphere? Do they get involved in politics? Do they stand for election? Do they join a branch, a local organisation, and focus on the grassroots activism? Are there any particular words of advice you would give?
So my advice would be twofold. First, consider your talents and how you can use them in a fight for what I think is fundamentally civilization itself. And there is no better cause. Can you think of a better cause to be part of than that? And second of all, my advice would actually be very simple. Join with a group like SPUC because they already know where your talents can be used. Your organization works in politics, it works in outreach, it works in media. You have so many different opportunities. And so even just to get connected with an organization that knows where the fight is happening, where the talents can be applied, where your time could best be used, I think that your organization provides extraordinary guidance for young people and that it's a resource young people should consider using. And so even if they don't join the organization full time, like our organization CCBR in Canada, we say, do a 4-month internship with us and you'll learn so much about yourself and you'll learn so much about the cause and the ways that your own skill set can be used. And so people who have worked for us have gone on to work in politics, to be elected, to work inside the offices of MPs, have gone into academia, and so we can have an effect that way. So connecting with a pro-life organization like yours is what I would advise young people to do, even if it's just to situate yourself in this battle and find out where you can best use your talents.
Well, thank you very much for that advice, Jonathan. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching SPUC TV. If you're enjoying our content, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications.
A convicted double murderer has been handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 42 years after brutally killing his pregnant partner and their unborn child. A case which SPUC believes tragically underlines the vulnerability of unborn children. Shane March, aged 47, stabbed 32-year-old Alana Odysseos more than 20 times at her home in Walthamstow last July, while she was in the early stage of pregnancy with her third child. He admitted the murder after previously being released on licence for an earlier murder conviction. Chilling CCTV footage of Shane March in the back of a police van was released by the Metropolitan Police and shows him boasting that he had no regrets and deserved the death penalty.
Yeah! I don't regret nothing. Yeah? Give me the death chamber. Yeah? That's what I want. A full injection and put me out my misery. Yeah? And let me just rot this job. Either way, it doesn't problem. My devil's bit me. Yeah? There's a place for me now in hell. Thank you. Thank you to the kind officers. Thank you. Record this. Yeah?
Everything's cool recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in it. Keep me in job. I want my grave in a job. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah! Yeah! I'm a demon. Yeah!
The case highlights a chilling dimension of violence against pregnant women, which too often fails to fully recognise the unborn child's humanity or the urgent need for protection. Commenting on the case, SPUC CEO John Deegan said, "When a child waiting to be born is slaughtered next to their mother, our laws and culture must ask, whose life mattered? For defenders of life, there were 2 murders, not just one." SPUC emphasises that the unborn child in Alana's womb became the victim of the violence, and that the call for a culture of protection cannot stop at birth. SPUC points out that the criminal justice system, while visibly acting in this case, must continue to recognise that unborn children are persons whose rights deserve equal defence. Beyond the courtroom, SPUC calls for more robust measures to protect pregnant women from coercion, abuse and violence, and for society to adopt a deeper respect for unborn life. The loss here is double. A mother was murdered and her unborn child's life was ended, John Deegan added. A similarly harrowing case from Florida has ended in a guilty verdict, which also underlines the urgent need to protect unborn children and their mothers. Last week, 23-year-old Jonathon Van Maren was convicted of first-degree murder and the killing of an unborn child after he fatally shot his 18-year-old girlfriend, Kaylin Fiengo, when she refused to abort their baby. Investigators revealed that Fiengo had sent a photograph of 2 positive pregnancy tests to Faison, triggering a demand from him for an abortion. When she continued her pregnancy, he lured her to a remote park, shot her, and left her and their unborn child in her car. The case is both tragic and symbolic. It exposes how the unborn child can become a target and a victim in its own right, dismissed as an inconvenience rather than protected life. Highlighting not just violence against a woman, but violence that encompasses the weakest human being, the unborn. This case shows the darkest extremes of a society which treats pregnancy not as something to be supported, but as something to potentially eliminate. In calling for action, SPUC urges governments and communities to adopt stronger legal protections for unborn children, better support for pregnant women under pressure, and preventive efforts around coercion and violence in pregnancy. As the justice system decides Faison's sentence, possibly the death penalty, we can only hope that this case sends a message that unborn children demand recognition, care and defence, not death. Pro-life campaigners have expressed grave concern after the European Parliament's Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality adopted amendments proposing EU-wide recognition of safe and legal abortion and expanded funding for abortion services. The committee's decision comes amid a broader push to enshrine abortion as a fundamental right across the European Union. In a motion adopted by the European Parliament last year, MEPs voted 336 to 163 in favour of including abortion within the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU. A move SPUC argues fundamentally contradicts the Charter's Article 2 declaration that everyone has the right to life. This shift in legislative momentum signals a dramatic reorientation of EU policy, by excluding unborn children from the definition of human rights, at a stroke betraying the most vulnerable among us. While the measures are non-binding, they send a potent cultural message that abortion may be treated as a universal right rather than an exceptional act. Furthermore, SPUC warns that the proposed funding cuts to European pro-life organisations and the inclusion of compulsory abortion coverage in medical curricula mark a moral assault on conscience rights. It can only be hoped that sovereign nations within the EU resist the imposition of supranational abortion mandates and instead prioritise support for mothers and children. As the European Parliament advances these proposals, opposition is growing to what has been described as ideologically driven abortion expansion. The prospect of legalising assisted dying in the UK has reached a critical juncture after peers heard that the lethal drugs intended for such procedures would not be regulated as standard medicinal products. According to briefing material for the Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill, substances designed to end a life would be classified differently, meaning they would circumvent standard medicines regulation protections. This is an alarming shift. Treating drugs used to facilitate death as something other than medicines signals a profound undervaluing of life. Concerns have been raised that substances used to bring about death should not be exempt from the rigorous approval, safety monitoring, and professional oversight required of every medicine. The briefing reflects concerns that the legislation gives the Secretary of State power to specify approved substances for assisted dying by regulation without full parliamentary scrutiny, and that these may include unlicensed drugs or high-dose combinations that fall outside existing safety frameworks. The charity warns that this raises serious ethical and clinical safety questions. Medications intended for the end of life must undergo thorough testing, post-market surveillance, and conscience protections for medical professionals. SPUC has also highlighted the implications for vulnerable persons. If the end-of-life pathway becomes normalised through the use of non-medicine substances, there is a risk of weakening protections for the terminally ill and undermining the principle that medicine is for healing, not ending life. There are significant concerns that assisted dying legislation does not include stringent safeguards, full transparency of the substances involved, and an unambiguous reaffirmation of the duty to care for life until its natural end. As Parliament continues to debate the bill, SPUC has highlighted the fact that relabelling drugs used to end life as non-medicines does not mitigate the moral gravity of the Act. It intensifies it. The debate on lethal poisons took place as MSPs on the Scottish Parliament's Health Committee voted decisively to reject an amendment that would have limited access to assisted dying to those predicted to have only 6 months or less to live. The vote concluded with 7 against and 2 in favour. The amendment tabled by Labour MSP Daniel Johnson sought to tighten eligibility for the Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill to those facing an imminent death, defined as weeks or months rather than years. Mr. Johnson warned that the loophole could mean people living with long-term conditions or stabilised illnesses might qualify under the broader definition in the current draft of the bill. The rejection of this limit deepens the risk of a slippery slope in end-of-life legislation, one that gradually expands the scope of assisted dying beyond the most urgent terminal cases. A law which allows those who may live months or even years to opt for assisted death inevitably normalises the idea that some lives simply aren't worth living. Clearly, however, life-ending legislation never exists in a vacuum. The broader context includes pressures on the vulnerable, subtle coercion, and uneven or very limited access to palliative care. SPUC calls on MSPs to pause the bill's progress and ensure stronger protections, including a clear lifespan threshold and rigorous oversight for capacity and coercion. I'm William Curry, and this was SPUC TV News, bringing to light what others hide. It's not too late to buy Christmas cards and support SPUC at the same time. These are just some of the designs available to order in our online shop. Just visit our website spuc.org.uk/shop. The address is on screen now to complete your order.
In the last 50 years, a surge of reproductive technology has revolutionised the practice of obstetrics and gynecology. First, effective hormonal contraceptives were made available to the public in the 1960s, and since their debut have been used to treat almost every gynecologic abnormality. Second, in the past 30 years, infertility has largely been managed using assisted reproductive technologies, primarily intrauterine insemination, IUI, with recourse to in vitro fertilization, IVF, when insemination fails. As a result, the new norm in mainstream gynecology has been to suppress or to bypass a woman's fertility cycle. Experiencing infertility is a painful and often isolating experience. There is profound suffering involved, and women across the UK and beyond are being told that IVF is their only option. Yet there is a different approach, such as NFP. I understand not all physical suffering can be fixed in this world. However, from a woman's health literacy perspective, it's vital for every woman to know about their hormonal health. In a world where we are seeing birth rates declining, it's more important than ever that women have access to information regarding their hormonal health, and above all, learn that there are alternatives to consuming large doses of chemicals and pharmaceuticals. I'm Catherine Mokler, and this is Viewpoint. Physicians and patients who firstly conscientiously object to therapeutic use of hormonal contraceptions on the grounds that it subjects patients to ineffective treatment of symptoms rather than treating their underlying disease, and secondly, morally oppose the assisted reproductive technologies approach to infertility, are now able to pursue an alternative approach that accords with their consciences. Restorative reproductive medicine is leading the way with Napro Technology. Based on over 30 years of research and practical application, Napro Technology, which is natural procreative technology, is a women's health science which has its main principle the ability to work cooperatively with the woman's menstrual and fertility cycle. Napro Technology relies on the Creighton Model Fertility Care System, CRMS, using biomarkers to monitor easily and objectively the occurrence of various hormonal events during the menstrual cycle. Learning to chart a woman's cycles using NFP is a useful starting point to understanding what is going on inside a woman's body. Many gynecological and hormonal issues can be diagnosed from analysing a chart. For those with irregular cycles, knowing when the fertile window is can be crucial in timing intercourse to maximise the chances of conception. Lots of young women with endometriosis are being told that they have unexplained infertility. Napro approaches find the underlying cause of infertility and use treatments that optimise the couple's natural fertility. The techniques result in pregnancy rates which are higher than that with IVF treatment, and the pregnancies themselves have better outcomes, for example, lower rates of preterm deliveries, low birth weight, and multiple births. CRMS provides valid information that can be interpreted by a woman and by physicians who are specifically trained in the system. Napro Technology is the first women's health science to network family planning with reproductive health monitoring and gynecological health maintenance, unlike common artificial and suppressive approaches. This is a fertility care-based medical approach rather than a fertility control approach that provides medical and surgical treatments. Napro Technology identifies the problems and cooperates with the menstrual and fertility cycles that correct the condition, maintain the human ecology, and sustain a woman's procreative potential. It has many applications including family planning, the evaluation and treatment of infertility and other reproductive disorders, abnormal bleeding, abnormal hormone conditions of the menstrual cycle, including premenstrual syndrome and recurrent ovarian cysts, the dating and beginning of pregnancy, and postpartum depression. In stark contrast, IVF leaves the underlying root or roots of the woman's infertility untreated, or at best rarely treated. Hence, after a round of IVF, a woman is still infertile. The root of her infertility has not been addressed at all, or only unsuccessfully addressed. IVF leapfrogs over the cause or causes of infertility, requiring the woman who wants a second try at pregnancy or a second pregnancy to subsequently return to IVF, at great financial cost to patients and financial gain to providers. Additionally, any reproductive technology, such as IVF, that fails to respect the dignity of the baby being conceived by threatening the child's right to life, cryopreserving the child, or exposing the embryonic human being to further objectification via research, tyrannically deprives the newly conceived human being of his or her just right to be conceived, gestated, born into, and raised within the marital love of his or her parents. Many women believe that they need birth control to treat things like endometriosis. However, with Napro Technology, it shines a different light and offers different solutions. Ironically, in an age when organic and natural products and treatments are prized by women and marketing campaigns, highlighting how natural and pure their products are, from cosmetics to nutrition supplements and even drinks, it is bizarre that a preference for pure, natural or organic choices in so many areas is completely abandoned by most women when it comes to fertility products. When controlling fertility, women seem happy to consume huge doses of synthetic and artificial chemicals and pharmaceutical products which are far from pure, natural or organic. It's strange that fears of side effects, complications and the consumption of utterly unnatural products doesn't matter when it comes to fertility, even among women who go out of their way to eat only the healthiest food and drink only expensive bottled water. NFP takes the same approach. It keeps things natural and avoids anything artificial. It is a method where womanhood and femininity aren't suppressed. It's nice to know that other options exist, as in nurturing her body and bringing it to its healthiest state, readying it for a healthy pregnancy, so that the woman and her husband, based on their circumstances of their marriage and guided by their intelligent knowledge of their phases of fertility, can either limit births, space their children for serious reasons, or more readily achieve pregnancies according to their wishes for a large family. The cost of NFP is almost significantly lower than IVF. IVF patients need to do yet another round of IVF at 100% of the original fee. If they fail to achieve a pregnancy in cycle 1 or in an earlier cycle, the costs can very quickly mount up. While many infertile Napro patients will, after their first Napro baby, go on and conceive more children without further clinical intervention or expense. Those who try the Napro approach and still can't conceive do at least know that they are still in optimal reproductive health. With continued use of charting, women will be in touch with their body and their fertility in a totally healthy way. In an era where all things natural and organic are prized, isn't it time we ditched the chemicals and took the same approach to our own fertility?
That's all we have time for this week. If you enjoyed the show, then please like, comment and subscribe for weekly videos. And if you have any stories you think we should cover, then please email us at the address on screen or in the description. Thank you for watching.